The town of Renfield was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's middle names and birthdays. Tucked between golden wheat fields and the endless glitter of Lake Marlow, it was a town made of tradition. Family names meant something here. Shops bore generations of surnames: Caldwell and Sons, Harper Brothers, Derry, Lindley's Tailors, since 1901, and that was the problem. Legacy wasn't just a value, it was a currency. Children were groomed not to chase dreams, but to inherit responsibilities. In Renfield, every newborn was another brick in a family name's foundation. Every wedding was a merger. Every woman a potential mother to a business heir. Emily Nolan had lived her whole life in Renfield until she turned 24. She remembered every dusty summer, every smell from her mother's bread oven, the scent of lavender pies cooling on her mother's sill, the sound of kites flapping like hymns along the lakeshore as their paper wings caught the wind. There were days her heart had been full, but the memory that stained it all, the one that curled like smoke around the edges of every sweet recollection, the one she couldn't shake, was the look in her in-laws' eyes when the doctor told them she and Marco couldn't have children. Useless, his mother had muttered beneath her breath. It wasn't always like that. Once, Marco had kissed her under the maple trees lining the high school parking lot and told her she was all he'd ever need. She believed him. They all did. They married at 19, barefoot on the dock behind his parents' house, sun setting behind them like a promise. By 21, the questions began, small at first, folded between well-meaning smiles. By 22, the smiles faded. Her womb had become a community concern. By 23, the silence around her belly grew louder than any words. And by 24, she'd packed her life into 3 suitcases and left. No ceremony, no send-off. Just tears that never reached her cheeks and a vow that if she ever returned, it would be on her terms. Renfield didn't know it yet, but the girl they called Barron would one day return with a legacy of her own. The city was nothing like Renfield. It didn't ask questions. It didn't expect anything. It simply existed in glass and metal and the rush of wind between subway tunnels. Emily arrived with 3 suitcases, a resume light with small-town credentials, and eyes that hadn't yet stopped searching for the pieces of herself left behind. Her first apartment was a shoebox with water stains on the ceiling and a window that overlooked a brick wall. But it was hers. No in-laws. No disappointed glances over morning coffee. No pity. She found work at a bakery 3 blocks from the apartment. It was small, painted in faded pastels, with a hand-lettered sign that read, "Sugar and Bloom." Emily scrubbed counters, stacked cupcake boxes, and watched the city move past the fogged windows. Every morning she arrived before sunrise, mixing dough and memories, trying to prove she was still someone worth keeping. The smell of vanilla couldn't mask the ache, but ambition was stitched into her. She stayed late, learned the register, helped with inventory. After 3 months, the owner hugged her and said, "You're too bright for this place, hun. You belong in offices with views." So Emily started applying. She printed resumes at the library and walked for miles in the wrong heels. Most doors didn't open, but the one that did was tall, glass-walled, and intimidating. Axton Financial Group. She interviewed in a blazer from a thrift shop and left with a position as a receptionist. The first day, she sat at the marble front desk and listened. She watched how people dressed, how they moved, how they spoke. She mimicked their sharpness, their cool confidence. Within weeks, she had memorized the names of every executive, their coffee orders, the moods of their assistants. Her clothing changed, sleek lines, neutral palettes, low buns, and muted lipstick. But she kept her warmth. She smiled at the cleaning staff. She remembered birthdays. She brought lavender tea to the intern who had anxiety attacks before meetings, and eventually she caught the eye of someone powerful. Mr. Axton. He was a man with silver at his temples and a jaw that cut like granite. Tall, composed, and precise. Wealth didn't just hang off him, it moved with him, coiling through his voice, shining through every perfectly tailored suit. Rumor had it he built his first fortune in real estate, then multiplied it in venture capital. But what struck Emily wasn't the aura of power. It was the way he observed. Quietly, thoughtfully. One morning, she was on a call, diffusing a client's frustration with graceful patience. She ended the call, typed a few notes, and looked up to find Mr. Axton standing across the desk. He held a to-go cup in one hand. His other rested on the edge of the reception counter. "You handle people well," he said simply. Emily blinked. "Thank you, sir. I try." "What's your story?" It wasn't said with condescension or politeness. It was genuine. She hesitated, then answered with the truth. "Small-town girl. Learned how to smile through anything. Trying to build a life worth staying for." Mr. Axton's lips twitched with something close to amusement. "Good," he said. "Keep doing what you're doing." And that was how it began. The first time Emily met Lucas Axton, she was stapling a quarterly report. "You're not from here," he said, leaning against the edge of his father's office desk. His smile was lopsided, boyish, mischief made human. There was something unpolished about him despite the designer watch on his wrist. His hair, perfectly tousled, had that one strand that refused to stay in place. It gave him a certain charm, rebellious, effortless. Emily smiled back, but didn't pause her work. Small town, lake, kites, wheat fields, nothing exciting? Sounds peaceful, he said, watching her with a tilt of curiosity. It was, until it wasn't. Lucas chuckled. Cryptic. She didn't reply. Some memories weren't meant to be unpacked on a Tuesday afternoon. Lucas started coming around more often after that. He asked questions under the guise of needing help locating documents. He lingered near her desk when most people rushed past. He learned her coffee order before she ever mentioned it. Emily noticed. So did Mr. Axton. One afternoon, after Emily dropped off some reports, Mr. Axton stood near the window with his back to her, watching the skyline. "My son's name is Lucas. He's about your age. Sharp kid, though a little headstrong." His voice was laced with quiet pride. Emily raised an eyebrow as she placed the report on the edge of his desk. "Is this your attempt at matchmaking?" She folded a letter and set it aside. "Would it be a bad thing if I were?" Mr. Axton was nothing if not direct. He spoke plainly, never dressing up his words. He conducted himself with the same clarity he brought to his business. And with a multi-million-dollar company under his belt, it was clearly a formula that worked. "I don't mix office and romance," Emily said, smoothing the hem of her blazer. "Neither do I. But if something finds you outside those boundaries, don't be afraid of it." Emily didn't answer. But that night, when Lucas sent a text saying he had leftover Thai food and too many beers to drink alone, she didn't say no. It was the beginning of something neither of them could name. Not yet. It happened in mid-autumn. The leaves outside the Axton Financial Tower had just begun to blush gold. The city air had cooled to the kind that made people wrap scarves tighter and order cinnamon-spiced drinks. Emily was seated at her desk that morning, organizing a schedule for an upcoming investor meeting when her vision began to tunnel. The room swayed. Her hands trembled. A bead of sweat rolled down the back of her neck, despite the chill in the office. She stood up, intending to get water, but the floor tilted beneath her. She didn't remember falling. Lucas caught her before she hit the carpet. 1 second, he was teasing the office intern down the hall. The next, he was sprinting toward her, shouting her name. "Emily! Emily! Hey, stay with me!" He lowered her gently, propping her against his chest as he fumbled for his phone. His voice shook, all pretense gone. "Call a car! Get help now!" The next thing Emily remembered was blinking awake in the back of a luxury town car, her cheek pressed to Lucas's shoulder, the rumble of the city outside. His hand gripped hers tightly. "You're okay. You're okay. I've got you," he whispered over and over, as if afraid she might disappear again. His voice urgent and unfamiliar in its panic. The hospital room was too white, too cold, the kind of sterile where even the silence echoed. Machines beeped softly. An IV needle was taped into her hand. Lucas was pacing the room when the doctor entered, clipboard in hand, a calm expression drawn across his face. "Miss Nolan," he began gently, "your fainting episode was caused by a hormonal imbalance. It's part of a temporary condition that can interfere with ovulation. It may have contributed to prior fertility issues, but the good news is, it's treatable." Emily stared at him. The words sounded like they were coming from underwater. "You're saying I could still have children? With the proper treatment and time, yes. There's no medical reason you can't conceive in the future." Her breath caught in her throat. Her fingers curled around the edge of the bedsheet. For a long moment, she said nothing, her mind racing back through years of blame, of shame, of quiet nights with a pillow clutched against her abdomen where a child never grew. Lucas moved to her side. He didn't ask questions. He didn't press. He just sat beside her every day. He brought her soup from her favorite Thai place, the one with the 2 small tables and the jasmine rice folded like art. He read aloud headlines from business news and made sarcastic commentary until she laughed. He showed up with crossword puzzles, mint tea, and once, a tiny potted succulent she named Franklin. On the 3rd night, he rolled a chair closer to her bedside, legs sprawled, tie loosened. "You scared the hell out of me, you know." "I scare myself sometimes," she said, voice raw. They didn't talk about her past or his intentions. They just sat in the quiet until the nurse dimmed the lights. When she was discharged, Lucas met her at the entrance in his father's town car. Jazz was playing softly through the speakers. They didn't speak much on the drive, but when they pulled up outside her apartment, Lucas leaned over, brushed a strand of hair from her face, and kissed her gently, just once. Their first kiss. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a promise. It was a moment that said, "I see you. I'm not going anywhere." He took her to Paris first. They arrived just after the rain, when the cobblestones still shimmered and the sky was a watercolor blur. Lucas booked them into a boutique hotel with flower boxes on every window, and Emily stood on the balcony watching the Eiffel Tower twinkle like it was putting on a show just for her. They ate crepes at sunrise. They kissed beside the Seine, and on their second night, Lucas insisted on dancing with her in the middle of Rue Claire with a violinist playing nearby. Then came Santorini, white rooftops, blue domes, the sea stretched like eternity. Lucas surprised her with a suite perched on the edge of a cliff, the kind of place that made you feel like you could fly. They swam in infinity pools, watched the sun dissolve into gold every evening, and wandered through narrow alleys lined with lemon trees and laughter. Then the Amalfi Coast. He rented a small wooden boat and rowed them out under the stars. Emily leaned back, listening to the water lap against the hull, and thought, for the first time in her adult life, that maybe this was happiness without an expiration date. But Emily never cared for the yacht or the candlelit dinners. She loved how Lucas would walk barefoot down cobbled alleys just to buy her a warm, buttery croissant. She loved how he picked wildflowers from a cliff's edge and tucked them into her braid without saying a word. She loved how he let her fall asleep in the middle of museum tours and carried her quietly through crowds just so she wouldn't miss the train. They didn't take selfies. They didn't broadcast their love. They simply lived in it. They married quietly in Tuscany, No press, no social media, just vows in a vineyard at sunset, golden light spilling over olive trees, with a soft breeze brushing through Emily's hair like a benediction. She wore a cream dress with a low back and bare feet. Lucas wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up. Mr. Axton stood as witness, a rare softness in his eyes. No crowd, no applause, just 3 people, a violinist, and a promise sealed beneath a sky on fire with twilight. Lucas whispered, "No matter what happens next, you are the greatest surprise of my life." And for the first time in years, Emily believed the future might be hers to shape. She was brushing her teeth when it happened. The minty foam clung to the corners of her mouth as she doubled over the sink, a sharp wave of nausea washing through her without warning. Emily clutched the edge of the marble counter and waited for it to pass. Her stomach twisted again, violently this time, sending her rushing to the toilet. She sat on the bathroom floor for a long while after, head resting against the cool tile. "Something's wrong," she muttered, wrapping her arms around her knees. Lucas found her there, still pale, her toothbrush forgotten on the edge of the sink. "You okay?" "I think it's food poisoning," Emily said, reaching for the ginger tea he handed her. Lucas crouched in front of her, brow arched. "Or..." "Don't," she warned. "You always jump to conclusions." He stood and disappeared into the hall. Moments later, he returned with a small paper bag. Inside, a pregnancy test. Emily stared at it as if it might bite. "Seriously?" Lucas sat beside her. "You've been sick 3 mornings in a row. It's not just bad sushi." She took the test in silence. Minutes passed, then 2 pink lines appeared. Emily's breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she held the stick closer, then further away, as if the angle might change the truth. She sank slowly to the floor, her back sliding against the cabinet until she was sitting again, knees drawn to her chest. Her whole body shook. Tears spilled down her cheeks, raw, involuntary, stunned. "I didn't think this would ever happen for me," she whispered, her voice a ghost of itself. Lucas was beside her in an instant. He didn't speak right away. He just wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "It's happening now," he said quietly. She clung to him. For once, she didn't have to be composed, didn't have to explain. She was allowed to fall apart in the arms of someone who had already chosen to stay. Later that night, as they lay on the couch wrapped in a knit blanket, Emily cradled a hand over her stomach. Lucas kissed her hair and whispered, "You're already the best mom I've ever known." And under the dim glow of the living room lamp, Emily finally let herself believe that her past did not define the life growing inside her. It was a new beginning, a miracle she once thought had passed her by. But it had simply arrived right on time. She wore cream silk and gold earrings when they landed in Renfield. The Axtons didn't do quiet entrances. A sleek, black private jet glided across the small-town runway like a visiting monarch. The chauffeur opened the door to a luxury sedan with precision, stepping aside as Lucas helped Emily down onto the tarmac. Her structured camel-colored coat draped elegantly over her form, the swell of her pregnant belly unmistakable even beneath the tailored fabric. The wind teased a few strands of her hair loose from her low bun. Behind her, Mr. Axton stood tall in a navy overcoat, a picture of power and calm. Even without speaking, his presence turned heads. Renfield wasn't ready. People watched from windows. Curtains parted. Phones clicked. Whispers swirled through the sleepy town like wildfire. "Is that Emily Nolan? Is she pregnant? Who's that man with her? Is that Lucas Axton? The son?" Emily walked ahead, chin high, her heels clicking confidently along the cobblestone streets she once ran barefoot. Lucas walked beside her, with an arm lightly at her back, equal parts partner and protector. Behind them, Their driver unloaded a monogrammed suitcase. They stopped first at her childhood home, the small blue cottage with peeling white shutters and a picket fence in need of mending. She paused at the gate, her breath catching in her throat as memories pressed up against her like fog on glass. The door creaked open before she could knock. Her mother stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, face slack with disbelief. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Emily!" Emily smiled gently, though her voice carried steel beneath the warmth. "Hi, Mom." Her father appeared behind her mother, blinking hard, his face gone pale. Lucas offered a courteous nod. "Mr. and Mrs. Nolan." They ushered them inside wordlessly. The living room still smelled of cedar and old baking trays. Family photos hung crooked on the walls, and Emily noticed, without surprise, that every photo still reflected the version of her life before she left. They sat. Emily unbuttoned her coat slowly. Her mother gasped. "You're expecting?" She breathed. Emily nodded. "Twins." The word landed like thunder in the small room. Her father sat heavily into his armchair, mouth parting with some silent question he never spoke. Mr. Axton stepped forward, his voice smooth and deliberate. "We thought it was time Emily visited home, with her new family." Her mother's eyes brimmed with tears. She looked between the men flanking her daughter, one calm and stately, the other visibly devoted, and something cracked in her. The last time she had seen Emily, she was broken. Now, she was powerful, whole, unshakable. Emily didn't look around for approval. She didn't ask permission to be proud. She simply sat tall, her hands resting over the place where two lives grew, living proof that she had never been the problem. And this time, no one dared say otherwise. The annual Renfield Harvest Fair was the town's crown jewel. Tents lined the main square, bursting with caramel apples, pumpkin pies, homemade quilts, and children's artwork strung on clotheslines. Folk music hummed from a corner stage. The smell of kettle corn danced with the crispness of hay and cider. Marco arrived that afternoon with his new wife Lila and their infant son. Lila wore a pale floral dress, her auburn hair cascading in perfect waves down her back. Her makeup was soft, maternal. On her hip, she balanced their ginger-haired baby boy, dressed in plaid and tiny boots, while chatting with townsfolk as if she were born for the role. Marco walked beside her with easy confidence, greeting neighbors with nods and brief smiles. He held his head high, proud of the family he'd built since Emily left. His parents trailed them, still clinging to their place as town elders, whispering approval over every coo and compliment directed at their grandson. They moved through the fair like royalty, until the crowd parted. And there she was, Emily, radiant, pregnant. She wore a flowing ivory wrap dress cinched just above her belly, her long chestnut hair pinned back with pearl combs. One hand rested gently on her stomach, the other held Lucas's. Lucas, handsome in a tailored navy blazer and open-collared shirt, walked confidently beside her, the embodiment of wealth and devotion. Behind them, Mr. Axton followed, his mere presence commanding silent reverence from anyone who recognized him. The murmurs began immediately. "Is that Emily? She looks like a movie star. She married into the Axtons?" Marco stopped mid-stride, his jaw tightened. He blinked as if trying to process what he was seeing. Emily didn't waver. Her posture remained regal. Her expression, serene, unbothered, kind. Lila turned, her brows furrowing as she noticed the hush. Her smile faltered. Her gaze swept to Emily, down to her belly and back again. The baby fidgeted on her hip. Lila soothed him, tickling him lightly under the chin as she flashed a perfectly practiced smile at Emily. The smile didn't reach her amber eyes. Marco's mother turned her head away, lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. His father crossed his arms. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing, The silence between them stretched long and tight. Emily met Marco's gaze and offered a calm, knowing smile. Not smug, not mocking, just whole, as if to say, I survived what you broke, and I became better for it. Lucas leaned in slightly and kissed her temple. Mr. Axton stepped beside them, surveying the crowd with the composed detachment of someone used to commanding boardrooms, not barns. And the world didn't need Emily to speak, because her presence, glowing and unshakable, said everything they never let her say before. The fair went on. Music resumed. Children squealed, but the Nolans and the De Lorenzos stood frozen in that moment of reckoning, watching the woman they discarded bloom in the light of her new life. Emily turned first, and she walked on. The town hadn't changed. Not really. The sidewalk still bore the hairline cracks where Emily had once skinned her knees chasing after the neighbor boy's rusty bike, laughing and bleeding all at once. The same flower pots hung crookedly from lampposts down Main Street. The bell above Haven's grocery still jingled with the same tinny, off-key chirp it had for 20 years, and the front window still bore that hand-painted sign with a sunflower that had long since faded to beige. But this time, heads turned. It was subtle at first. A pause in someone's step, a glance that lingered too long, a whisper that never quite became a sentence. Emily walked the aisles slowly, letting her fingers brush against glass jars of homemade jam, sea salt caramels in clear wrapping, local honey thick in amber bottles. She wore a pale blue blouse tucked neatly into high-waisted white denim jeans, her favorite cropped jacket hugging the curve of her pregnancy like it was protecting more than just her belly. Lucas was beside her, one hand on the cart, the other occasionally brushing her knuckles. Quiet, supportive, a steady presence in a sea of curiosity. They always stare this much? He murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. Emily didn't look up. They stare because I was the girl who left in shame and came back glowing. Lucas smirked softly, but his eyes scanned the store like a bodyguard. You make glowing look dangerous. At the end of the aisle stood Mrs. Redwood, the butcher's wife, her apron streaked with flour, her eyes wide with a cautious kind of wonder. She clutched a half-dozen eggs in one arm like a fragile offering. Emily, she said, her voice gentle, almost reverent. You're back. Emily gave a practiced smile, polite, composed, kind without being submissive. For a little while. Mrs. Redwood's gaze dropped to her belly. She blinked rapidly. And you're expecting? Lucas stepped forward slightly, placing a protective hand on the small of Emily's back. His voice was calm, but proud. Twins. Mrs. Redwood's lips parted in visible shock. Her shoulders stiffened like she didn't know whether to congratulate or retreat. She nodded twice, then shuffled away without another word, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Behind her, 2 teenage girls peeked from behind a stack of canned tomatoes. One snapped a blurry photo on her phone. The judgment that once trailed Emily like a shadow had warped into something else now. Confusion, envy, awe. Emily turned to Lucas, her eyes sharp and soft all at once. They used to think my body was broken, she said, that I was useless, unfit to carry their sacred legacy. Now I'm carrying 2 lives inside me. It's poetic, really. Lucas brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and pressed a kiss to her temple. You're everything they could never be, gracious, strong, and still kind. She smiled faintly and moved to the next aisle. In her cart sat a block of farm butter, a tin of vanilla tea, and a bouquet of wildflowers tied with twine. In another life, these things might have seemed ordinary, but in this moment, in this town, every step she took, every item she picked from the shelf, was a quiet act of rebellion. And every stare was just proof that she'd become something too powerful for them to ignore. Back at her childhood home, the ceilings seemed lower than she remembered. the corners smaller. The once broad hallways now felt like narrow passages between ghosts. Her parents hovered like shadows, unsure where to settle. The kitchen was just as it had been, a faded quilted potholder on the hook, the same blue ceramic sugar bowl next to the stove. A pot of tea steamed unattended. Her mother stood at the counter, wringing a dish towel between her hands until it looked like it might tear. We didn't know what to say when you left," her mother whispered. Emily didn't turn around. She stared out the window, watching the wind stir the rusted swings set in the backyard. The chains creaked like old bones. One swing spun slowly in place. "You didn't try to stop me," she said. Her father cleared his throat. He sat at the edge of a kitchen chair like the full weight of the conversation might knock it over. "We thought maybe it was for the best. The pressure from Marco's family. It was mounting. We couldn't shield you from it." Emily turned, her voice flat. "You didn't want to." The air went still. Her mother flinched like the words had struck her physically. "We were afraid," she admitted, voice trembling. "Afraid of choosing sides, of losing the people we'd known our whole lives." Emily's lips parted in disbelief. "So you chose silence and let them humiliate me." Her mother blinked back tears, cheeks red. "We made mistakes. We see that now." Emily's gaze was cold, but not unkind. "You stood by while I was discarded like a broken tool, all because I couldn't be the vessel they wanted." Lucas, standing beside her, placed a hand on her arm, quiet but grounding. "You're not a vessel," he said gently. "You're everything." Her mother let out a quiet sob and turned away, one hand covering her mouth. Her father's eyes flicked to the floor, shame crawling up his throat. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he murmured. "For the family, for peace." Emily glanced around the room. The wood paneling smelled like lavender soap and lemon oil. The light caught the faded edges of wallpaper. Her childhood room was just above. She could still picture the unicorn stickers she had lined along the closet door, still there, probably peeling now. It was like time had gone on without her, but never moved forward. She took a slow breath. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said, "but I also stopped needing your approval." Her mother turned back, eyes glassy, cheeks wet. "You were always too good for this place," she whispered. Emily met her gaze. "Now I believe it." No one said anything after that, but the silence felt different than before. Not heavy, not angry, just honest. A door had finally closed, and with it, a new one swung open behind her. Lucas gave her hand a squeeze, and for the first time in a long time, Emily didn't feel like a daughter begging to be seen. She felt like a woman who had come home and left nothing behind. The next morning, the sun rose soft and warm, painting Lake Marlowe in hues of peach and silver. Dew clung to every blade of grass, and the sky held that early hush only small towns knew, where time walked slower and nothing rushed except the birds gliding over the sparkling water. Emily and Lucas took the path that looped gently along the lake's edge. The same path she'd run barefoot as a child, the same reeds she used to chase frogs through, the same willows whose branches had once hidden her diary in a tin box beneath the roots. Time hadn't touched this place. It had only deepened its quiet. The old dock groaned with every gust of wind. Dragonflies skimmed over rippling water, their wings catching sunlight like fragments of stained glass. Lucas carried a picnic basket in one hand and held hers in the other. Emily wore a long linen dress that fluttered around her calves. Her belly was beginning to drop. Soft, full, a secret no longer. "This is where I used to dream," she said, her voice hushed like she didn't want to wake the memory of having the little one run through the reeds, barefoot and laughing. Lucas's hand tightened gently around hers. Now you get to dream new dreams." They paused beneath a white ash tree, its limbs dancing above them. In the distance, children ran with kites shaped like swans and dragons. Their laughter rose like wind chimes. Some of the old townsfolk were gathered near the edge. Families on checkered blankets, grandmothers in sun hats, young couples sipping lemonade. A few waved. Emily nodded in return, but her focus never strayed far from the man beside her. He looked at her like she wasn't part of the scenery. But the reason it all made sense. She slipped off her sandals and stepped into the lake. The water, cold and clean, curled around her ankles. Her toes sank into the soft silt, and she let the chill ground her. "I used to believe I was cursed," she said after a long silence. "That God forgot me, that there was something in me, something broken." Lucas crouched beside her, setting the basket in the grass. He looked at her the way one looks at something holy. "You weren't cursed," he said. "You were waiting for the people who deserved you." A breeze moved through the trees, rustling leaves like applause. Across the lake, a canoe drifted lazily. Behind them, a group of teenagers biked past, slowing just a little when they saw who she was. Recognition dawning like surprise. Emily sat down on the grassy slope, her feet still in the water. Lucas lowered himself beside her, resting a hand lightly on her stomach. The townsfolk kept their distance, but they watched. Watched the girl who left in shame sit proudly by the same lake she once fled from. Watched the man who had crossed cities and climbed legacies kneel in the dirt beside her, unbothered by mud or whispers. Watched the start of a new story, one that didn't erase the past, but rewrote its ending. Emily leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder. "They don't know what to make of me," she murmured. Lucas smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's because they're used to watching people stay small. You didn't." And just like that, Renfield became a place not just of what was, but of what could be. The contractions came swift, sharp, rhythmic waves that clawed through her lower back and surged into her spine like lightning. They were supposed to fly back to the city the next day. Instead, Emily clutched the edge of the guest bed in her parents' cottage, breathless, doubled over as her mother's hands trembled dialing the ambulance. Lucas knelt before her, his voice low and calm, even as the chaos swirled. "You're okay. Just breathe with me." Mr. Axton stood by the front door barking clear, strategic orders into his phone. He called ahead to the hospital, arranged for VIP treatment, and coordinated every step like it was a high-stakes boardroom acquisition. Her father hovered like a ghost. Her mother prayed between every scream. The ambulance lights flashed red against the white clapboard siding as the sirens faded into the distance. The hospital room pulsed with fluorescent light and tension. The beeping of machines, the sterile scent, the nurses' rushed footsteps, hours blurred. Emily cried out, clutching Lucas's hand so tightly he feared his fingers might never work again, but he didn't flinch. He whispered through clenched teeth, "You're almost there. I've got you." Sweat dripped from her brow. Her voice was raw from screaming, but there was a fire in her eyes, fierce, defiant, primal. Then, finally, a cry pierced the room. A girl. The doctor gently placed her on Emily's chest, and Emily sobbed, clutching the small pink body against her heart. Moments later, another cry. A boy. 2 lives, 2 miracles, 2 reminders that fate could be rewritten. Lucas kissed her forehead, tears escaping from the corners of his eyes. "We did it," she whispered, breathless and shaking. "You did it," he said, voice breaking. "Twice." Mr. Axton stepped forward slowly. He didn't speak at first. He simply stared at the tiny bundled twins with a reverence usually reserved for stock portfolios and major deals. Then he held each baby in turn, his sharp eyes misting. "They're perfect," he said softly. "A true legacy." Emily lay back on the pillows, arms cradling her children, her body broken but her spirit soaring. She looked from her son to her daughter, her throat thick with emotion. She thought of every whispered insult, every cold shoulder, every tear shed alone. And then she looked up at the ceiling, her lips parted in a breathless, grateful smile. Because here she was, not broken, not barren, whole. The boutique opened in spring. Spring in Renfield unfurled like a watercolor dream. Cherry blossoms spilled petals onto Lake Marlowe's mirrored surface in soft blushes of pink and white. Birds returned to the trees. The scent of damp earth floated through town on soft breezes that hinted at possibility. It was the kind of season that felt like rebirth. Emily chose the name with intention. Wren and Marlowe, named for her 2 babies. It was more than a store. It was an answer to every door that had been slammed in her face. The boutique was nestled in a renovated brick building off Main Street. She painted the trim sage green. She filled the front windows with tiny handmade mobiles, linen rompers, and hand-stitched quilts with lullaby verses embroidered along the edges. Inside, the air always smelled like lavender and wood polish. Shelves held vintage baby goods, wooden teething rings shaped like stars, hand-poured lotions, and little knitted caps no bigger than an apple. Every shelf told a story. Every corner whispered resilience, molded by the town that once broke her and the lake that raised her. The town had never seen anything quite like it. The renovated brick building on Main Street drew every gaze. Sage green, trim-framed tall windows showcasing a miniature world. Mobiles cut from pearlescent paper. Linen rompers embroidered with constellations. Heirloom quilts whose edges bore lullabies in silvery thread. Emily arrived before dawn, balancing a thermos of chamomile tea and her notebook of last-minute to-dos. The interior glowed under Edison bulbs suspended from reclaimed wood beams. She exhaled, feeling the space breathe with her. Lucas entered moments later, carrying 2 pastel pastry boxes from Sugar and Bloom, the little bakery that had once been her lifeline. He set them on the maple counter. "For good luck," he said, kissing her cheek. Mr. Axton followed, crisp as ever, in charcoal wool, but his eyes softened at the sight of hand-painted signage that read, "Wren and Marlowe, keepsakes for little wanderers." By 8 o'clock the first morning, a line ribboned down the block. A freelance photographer snapped photos for the Renfield Gazette. Former classmates whispered, stunned by the sophisticated space that smelled of lavender, cedar, and hope. New mothers, old neighbors. Some came out of genuine curiosity. Some came to see if the girl who left in disgrace really had made something of herself. She had. Emily unlocked the door. Church bells in the distance chimed 9. "Welcome," she said, voice clear and steady. "Come see what love can build." Mr. Axton was the first investor. He offered capital, branding experts, and marketing insight. Lucas handled the finances, keeping the books balanced with quiet pride and spreadsheets even Emily could understand. But the heart of the boutique, that was Emily. Every swaddle, every poem, every wall decal painted in her careful brushstrokes. Beside every display sat a handwritten card explaining the maker's story. Because legacy, Emily believed, was amplified when shared. Customers lingered, reading, touching fabric, wiping tears. One young mother whispered, "It feels like stepping into a lullaby." Emily split weeks between their high-rise penthouse in the city and her parents' lakeside cottage in Renfield. She wanted her children to know both worlds, the steel and the soil, the skyline and the slow pace of small-town life. Mondays to Wednesdays, Manhattan skyline, supplier meetings, infant product expos. Thursdays to Sundays, Renfield, where she pushed a vintage pram along cobblestone and taught Marin and Lowell to dip toes in the lake. Lucas managed spreadsheets, but also wrangled twins during store hours, rolling a walnut wood playpen behind the counter. Mr. Axton funded an e-commerce site that crashed twice in its first week from overwhelming traffic. At night, Emily sketched new designs at the kitchen table under soft lamplight, doodles of night sky mobiles and storybook-themed playmats, while her parents rocked the babies in front of the hearth, the past slowly mending itself one lullaby at a time. Rain drummed against the shop's awning one quiet Wednesday. Emily hummed as she arranged keepsake memory boxes lined in velvet. The brass bell over the door tinkled. She turned. Marco stood in the doorway, alone. His hair was longer than she remembered. He looked tired, older than 30. He wore no ring. Emily's pulse quickened, but her voice remained even. "Can I help you?" He stepped in, shoulders hunched. "I wanted to see what you built, and to say I was wrong." Emily tilted her head slightly. "You were a coward." Rainwater pooled at his boots. He didn't argue. "I let my parents dictate my life. I let them tell me what love should look like." She said nothing. Silence stretched, broken only by the soft ticking of a wall clock fashioned from Lake Driftwood. He looked around the store, eyes lingering on the bassinet in the corner, on the soft glow of the lights, on the framed photo of her twins tucked behind the counter. "I lost the best thing I ever had," he whispered. Emily's eyes dropped to where her son and daughter slept side by side in a portable cradle just behind the register. Marin stirred. Lowell yawned. "No," she said gently but firmly. "You only delayed what I deserved." Marco looked down at the floor. "Your store. It's beautiful." He nodded once, then left. The door closed softly behind him. Emily didn't watch him go. She bent down and kissed each of her babies. Marin's sleepy forehead, then Lowell's tiny nose. She pictured her boutique at dusk as the sun sank below the horizon, warm lights glowing through sage-framed windows, casting patterns of hope onto the sidewalk. She hadn't merely survived Renfield. She had transformed it, one stitched verse, one cedar shelf, one healed heartbeat at a time. She built something, a legacy not born of pressure or shame or expectation, but of healing, and it was only just beginning. Emily sat on her back porch with a sleeping baby on each arm. The sun was setting in ribbons of pink and orange. Lucas brought her tea. "You changed this town," he said, settling beside her. He took one of the sleeping babies, securing the precious bundle against his chest. Emily looked out at the kites soaring over Lake Marlowe. "No," she said. "I just reminded them what real legacy looks like, and myself." She kissed her son, then leaned over to kiss her daughter as she snuggled against her father. "I used to think legacy was a burden handed down," she said. "Turns out, it's a story you author yourself." Then Emily closed her eyes, the wind soft against her face. She wasn't broken. She was blooming.